Good morning. Thanks for coming inside on this lovely spring morning that we're having here in Edinburgh. As Alex said, I've been lucky enough to travel to 6 continents and take on some incredible adventure challenges like trekking and sailing and paddling in some of the greatest parts of our planet. And I think I'm quite confident that I've found my niche there, this intersection between travel and endurance sport. Anyone who travels will tell you that's the best education you can have, and that's my external education. That's why I love it. And endurance sport, that's my internal education. That's when I learn more about myself. That's when I challenge myself. And so I've gone on these adventures. I'm going to talk to you about them this morning on the theme of risk. How am I going to do that? So risk is just a word. And you could change the word risk for a lot of things. You could say risk, you might think gamble, you might think luck, you might think danger. But I think that adventure is a word that you could use instead of risk as well. And I think that if you started to talk about the big risks that you take in your life and started looking at them as adventures, that'd be a really cool attitude to take towards them. So I'm going to talk through just a couple of my adventures for you. And we'll start at the beginning, my very first big adventure, before I knew that it was a big adventure and what I would end up doing with my life. This was 6 years ago, and I just moved back to my hometown of Calgary after being abroad doing my degree and traveling a bit. And so there I am on the threshold of my adult life. What am I going to do with it? And I'm sure a lot of you can relate that the recession was really hitting us. There weren't a lot of graduate jobs, all that boring stuff. And I felt like I really had 2 options in front of me. I could either just suck it up and go for these crappy jobs that were really crappy pay, or I could go on a thrilling adventure. And either way, I was going to be financially poor. So of course I chose the thrilling adventure. And I had this ridiculous idea that I would cycle from my hometown of Calgary to the Yukon in the north of Canada, a distance of about 3,000 kilometers. And of course I'd never had a bike before. I didn't know how to cycle. I was complete noob, but I thought this is a fantastic idea. And the thing about taking on a challenge that is so big that you can't really conceive how big it is, it's a lot easier to say yes to that, because you can't think about how hard it's going to be. It's a challenge that you understand completely, that you're quite confident on. You know how it's going to hurt and how hard it's going to be, and that's harder to say yes. So I marched down to a bike shop and explained my wacky idea and found out that this is actually a thing that people do. It's called bike touring, and the guy at the bike shop has to explain that to me, and he also points me to a website where there's this whole online community of people that do this, so I can read how other people do it and learn about it. And obviously didn't have anyone in my social circle I could really relate to and talk to about what I was doing, so it was really great to find this online community of people as ridiculous as me. And so that day at the bike shop was just an embarrassing experience. I had no idea what I was doing. They had to pick the bike for me, but then it's not that they just had to teach me about the clip pedals that you can get stuck in. They had to teach me how to change the gears. Like, I really didn't know what I was doing at all. But I got the bike you see there. And I spent the next few weeks learning how to ride it around the streets of Calgary and preparing for this adventure. And eventually the day came, and a few nights before I went, I was out with my friends, people I'd grown up with, and they staged a bit of intervention. And they sat me down and they said, "This is a really bad idea. This is crazy dangerous. You have no idea how far it is. There are bears. There are bad people on the highway. A solo woman shouldn't be out there on her own. Not to mention, you don't know how to ride a bike." So they were really against it, and they said, "Please don't go." And I think it's really crappy that there will always be someone who says your idea is bad and you shouldn't do it because you will fail. So don't ever be that person for someone. So of course I ignored my friends, and a couple days later, I left my parents' house in Calgary and started cycling towards the Rocky Mountains. And the first week was beyond incredible. Going through Banff National Park, where there's bears and there's elk, and I'm seeing them every day, and I'm going past the glaciers, and I'm going up these high mountain passes that were really hard work, and there's snow at the top. And I thought that was going to be impressive. I would tell you, in my home country, there's snow even in June, but it's snowing here this week, so that's gone. So I went through Banff, and then I went through Jasper, and it's just incredible. And I'm living outside, I'm camping every night, I'm in my element, I'm so happy. And once I passed the first week, and I've passed some really good mileage, I've shown that I actually can ride this bike now, I'm starting to feel really good. I'm getting my mojo. This is going to be successful. I'm awesome. Until one morning, I find myself lying on the side of the highway. I've had a crash. and I don't know what's happened. I don't know what I hit. I look around, and there's no immediate danger. I haven't actually seen another person or a car that day, so I have absolutely no idea how I've fallen. And I'm still clipped into the pedals, and you can see the bike's weighed down with these big panniers. So I kind of have to wrestle myself out awkwardly from under the bike after I spent goodness knows how long just sitting there stunned on my side. And I upright myself and upright the bicycle. And the handlebar, on the force of the impact when I fell, my handlebar crumpled and got mangled completely underneath itself. It's ruined. So I just start to cry. I've broken my bike. This is the most valuable thing I own right now. I don't have a job, and I've destroyed this bicycle. I can't get to the Yukon without the bike. The trip is over. I have to pack it in. I've failed. My friends were right. I'm devastated. Now, the thing about packing it all in northern Alberta is that you can't just walk to the next train station. It is wildly remote. You can be days away from help at any point. So I just sit down on the side of the highway. I've still not seen another car, so whatever. I just sit there crying and start to process what happened, try to figure out how did I actually get in this accident. And so I backtrack my steps. The day before, I'd had a huge mileage day, one of the biggest days of my life, and my muscles were really sore. I was really proud of myself. And the day before that was another huge mileage day, and the day before that, and so on, because of course I never had a huge mileage day before in my entire life, so the past week was just filled with back-to-back-to-back hard days. And that night before this crash had been a thunderstorm, so I hadn't slept. I'd just been up all night watching my tent flood and counting the seconds between thunder and lightning strikes, which meant that when I got up in the morning, because of the rain, there were all these puddles, and there were mosquito breeding grounds, and I'm a total mosquito victim. They just love me, so I just packed up really quickly and got on the highway and started pedaling really fast that morning, according to my bike computer, for over 2 hours before I had this accident. And the concept very slowly came down on me that I'd collapsed from exhaustion. And I didn't realize before that point in my life that people did collapse from exhaustion, let alone I could collapse from exhaustion, that the body would eventually just say, no more, and drop. So I opened the pannier that's got all my food in it. I'm basically living off this huge bag of muesli. And so I'm sitting there eating my muesli. And as the calories work their way into my muscles, and the shakes start to go away, and that brain fog starts to clear, I assess the situation again and dust myself off. I've obviously scraped my elbow and my knee, and clean myself off and pick up the bike again. And the handlebars that had been destroyed, that this bike is now ruined, turns out the force that pushed them in, I can just counter that and push them back out with a little bit of muscle. Everything's fine. The bike is fine. I'm fine. No one needs to cry so much. Everything's okay. And so, because I'm giving this talk, you can assume that I did make it to the Yukon in the end. It took me about a month. And what I really love about that story is that was my first big adventure lesson, and it was a lesson on quitting. Because I had quit. I did say the words, this ride is over, it's ruined, I failed. But because I was forced to by the Albertan wilderness to take some moment out and think about what was really going on, I realized that there was no need to quit, and I got back on my bike. And so now in my life, I always have that rule that you never quit when you're crying. Wait, breathe, have something to eat, relax, take yourself out of the situation, and always take 5 before you quit. A lot of you will recognize what this is a picture of. It's Petra Jordan. It's one of the 7 wonders of the world. It's really high on most travel bucket lists, and it was super high on my list. So a couple years after that Yukon trip, I was really excited to find myself here. What a lot of people don't know about Petra, it's not just these ancient stone carvings, but behind it there's actually this huge national park in the Arabian desert, and it's incredibly rugged terrain, incredibly hot desert. So I've traveled to Jordan, and I bought a 3-day national park pass to go hiking and trekking all around Petra. And I'm hiking along, and I'm probably thinking about nothing aside from how intensely hot the desert is. I really can't undersell that for you. Your head's just pounding. And I stumbled upon 2 English guys. And so Jordan wasn't really a part of the Arab Spring at this point, but tourism was very much affected. So I was often going for days without having any English conversations with anyone. And so I was so excited to hear their voices. I thought, I'm going to go make some friends. I haven't talked to anyone for a while. And I go over to these guys, and they're free climbing on the rocks. So they're scrambling up quite high without ropes. And so one of them's kind of come down. The other one, he's a little bit higher than the height of this room off the ground. So it doesn't look super high, but it's high enough that if he fell, he could he could break something important, which I think is what's going through his head because he's not moving. And we can't really figure out why he's not moving. And it turns out this guy that he's followed, they don't actually know each other. They met at their hostel and decided to hike together. And like a typical guy, he's just followed him up this rock. And now he's stuck. And sorry, guys. What a lot of climbers will tell you, the hardest thing about climbing is not getting to the top and taking the awesome photo. The hardest part is getting back down safely. And most climbing accidents happen on the descent. And this guy has just figured out that he has no idea how to climb down. And now he's frozen with fear. He can't go left, right, up, or down. He cannot move. He's having a massive meltdown up here. And this buddy, this guy that he didn't really even know, he's not sure how to react or what to do. How can we save him? And a local shepherd actually stumbles along, a guy with his goat, and none of us spoke Arabic, and he didn't have a mobile, so he's not really a character in the story, but he actually just sat down to watch. So I guess it was amusing for him. So no one's doing anything, and this guy is really hyperventilating up there on this steep, hot rock. So I make contact with him, and the first thing I do is start counting his breaths for him because he's hyperventilating. So we get him down to a point where he's actually breathing again. And his mind has checked out of the situation. I don't know if you've ever been so scared that you can't command your body to do what it needs to do, and that's where he is. So I had to do that for him. So I said, okay, like right hand red, left hand blue, and we get him slowly. It's one of those things where time stands frozen. I don't know if it's several minutes or several hours, but we finally got him down. And he wasn't great. I mean, he kind of slipped half the way, so the front of his body was just scraped raw on this hot sand rock. It wasn't a nice day out, and I'm sure his ego was way worse off. But he survived. So why am I telling you someone else's survival story? This was a really important lesson for me and a really big moment for me, as I was 23 at the time, and these two guys were a lot older than me, maybe in their 30s, and it wasn't a situation where I would naturally feel like I should be the one that takes charge and I should be the leader and take authority here. So that was a real lesson in finding my voice, and I think a lot of us can relate to a point in our careers, our lives, where we were either new or young or inexperienced and thought that we were just lower on the pecking order and didn't have the confidence to speak up and do the right thing and get the job done. So I like to go back to that moment every now and then in my mind. Same bike, photos taken 5 years later, so we're still friends. Last summer, as Alex was saying, I cycled all the way around the Baltic Sea. So it's a distance of nearly 4,000 kilometers through 9 countries, starting in Copenhagen, all the way around until I was back in Copenhagen 35 days later. 2 things that scared me about this adventure. One was cycling that distance in 35 days. For my body, that's quite a lot, and trust me, towards the end, it got really touch and go. And the other thing, and the thing that scared me the most, was I had to cycle through Russia. If any of you have seen YouTube clips of the motorways in Russia, this lawless land where everyone drives way too fast, a little bit drunk, and gets into these catastrophic accidents, that's the only image I have of the Russian motorway in my mind. And this cycling forum, the one that I discovered before I went to the Yukon that encouraged me to start this sport in the first place, I go there and I'm reading everyone that's been to Russia, which isn't a lot, and no one had anything good to say. Basically, all I can figure out is that as soon as I get to Russia, surely the earth is going to crumble away under my tires from poor infrastructure, and someone's going to hurl a bottle of vodka at me and then run me over and steal my bike, because that's all the information I can find. It sounds just like that. And so I actually made contact with a St. Petersburg cycling club, because I thought, who better than the locals? They'll tell me what to do. And I get in touch with this forum, which isn't well used because it's not a sport that's taking off there. And I asked them, what's the safest way to follow the Baltic Sea coastline through St. Petersburg? And I only got 2 responses, and they both said, take the train. So not exactly encouraging. So I crossed the border from Finland into Russia, and that's actually fine. Spend a couple days before I get to St. Petersburg, and they go well. And then I get to the outskirts of St. Petersburg when the motorway starts to pick up. And I'm meant to be on the quietest road, but it's quickly starting to look like YouTube. It's scary. Everyone's going 100 miles an hour. There's a series of overs and underpasses, which mean that there's kind of always a merge lane with someone screaming down the ramp and someone else screaming off it. So at any point, I've usually got cars on both sides of me going 100 miles an hour. This is not a good situation. I'm not enjoying myself. I'm terrified. And I come across an old bus shelter, so I just pull in there to have my mini meltdown. Now it's my turn to be frozen with fear. I don't want to be here at all. I'm literally wishing that the earth would open up and swallow me and take me somewhere else because this is not good and I can't do this. And so I'm having my little meltdown, and I look up, and the universe always has funny timing in these situations. And sure enough, across the side of the road on the other lane, there's an old guy cycling the other direction on his old bicycle, like Soviet-issue bicycle. He's wearing sandals, he's got no helmet, he's done his shopping, so his little shopping bag's on his handlebars, and he's just toddling along, taking up an entire lane of traffic. And he's got no gears, he's got no fear at all, and he's fine. You know what? These cars that I don't trust, they're all going around him, they'll figure it out. So I kind of have to have a word with myself at this point, because here I am in this bright colored shirt, I've got lights off the back of the bike, I've got a helmet, and if there's one thing I'm good at, it's riding this bike now. So I just had to get myself out of the situation. And I had to be that person that I was for that guy in Petra and do it for myself. And a lot of the adventure challenges I've taken on have been solo. So I've gotten really good at this. And of course, I'm also a freelancer. And most of you will know if you're a freelancer or a company director, when you work for yourself, you have to talk yourself off your ledge all the time. You have to talk yourself through your meltdowns. So I had to do that. I had to use my little Coach Jennifer voice and tell myself, okay, you're just going to get to that lamppost. Great, you got to the lamppost. Now you just need to get to that bridge. And I had to do that and get myself step by step all the way into St. Petersburg, where for the record, the first thing I did was just get a beer because I was just shaking, and I just sat there in the hotel with my beer until I could calm down. And it took me a couple days before I left St. Petersburg and could face the traffic again. And really, the best thing I can say about cycling in Russia is that it's over and I never have to do it again. I didn't like it. So it was really cool for me when I was putting together this talk and thought, what adventures would I tell you about? And it was really great to compare my first adventure in the Yukon to my most recent adventure that was 5 years later. So when I went to the Yukon, that was 3,000 kilometers, and it was in my own country, the entire way, one country, one language. And this Baltic trip was a greater distance, and it was through 9 countries and 9 languages. And yet this Yukon trip was so far out of my comfort zone. That story I told you is not an isolated incident of me crying on the side of the road. There was a lot of it the whole way there. It really pushed me. Whereas this Baltic trip, it was just well within my comfort zone. I was really happy all the time. It was just a holiday. It was something that I'm very confident doing until I got to Russia, and Russia knocked me back a few pegs and reminded me that this was a risk and I should be scared. So it was really just good for me to see how far I've come and how far I've developed, and that's from a life of adventure. So I'm going to draw us back to the topic of risk. I think when I talk about these adventures and tell you things that I've done, it's really obvious to see what the element of risk is. International travel, and a lot of travel I've done has been to the developing world or to conflicted areas. And of course, the physical challenges where I'm pushing my body to these limits. The risk is really obvious. It's an acute risk. Something could go wrong. But the risk that I probably think about the most, and the one that's maybe the most relevant, is this long-term risk that I'm playing, where I constantly park my career and park my personal life to go away on these journeys. Instead of saving for a house deposit, I've had no interest in that. I've just spent everything I've ever earned on travel, and I continue to do so. And so that leads me to posing to you one of my favorite questions, and a question I think that we should ask ourselves all the time, with everything that we give our energy to, with everything that worries us, with every challenge that we put in our paths. What's the point? For me, I know what the point of my adventures are. That's where I come alive, that's where I'm excited. They challenge me, they make me the best version of myself that I could possibly be, and they bring me a lot of joy, and isn't that the greatest point of doing anything? And I think that if we're going to take on any challenges, we're going to take on something that we perceive to be a risk. You should be quite clear that there's a point to doing it. And so I'm not standing up here giving you a talk on risk saying like, I took a big risk and it paid off and look at me now and that could be you, because I don't think that life is like that. For me, this is an ongoing risk. This is continuing to be shaky ground because I'll make it that way, because I believe in this risk, I believe in these adventures and what they do for me. And this isn't something that I see there being a finish line. This isn't something where I'm saying as soon as I hit this achievement, then I can stop. And I hope that everyone has something like that in their life, that they think they're just going to continue to hone that skill and that craft or that passion, whatever it is, that's not something that they'll one day retire from. And that challenges the traditional notion of how we should live our lives, that you just work until you hit this point, and then you're allowed to stop doing everything that you hate and do the stuff that you want to do. Because what's the point of that? So I just want to finish by talking about the concept and the definition of adventure, because the adventures that I've been talking to you about have more to do with what the classical definition of adventure that we all know, the exotic locations and the endurance expeditions. But adventure means so many different things to so many different people. And adventure is just that place at the edge of your comfort zone where you're really excited, where you're really scared, where it's really important to you, it's really thrilling, and it's a place where you grow and develop. So adventure can be climbing a mountain, it can be starting a business, it can be starting a relationship, but adventure is just that place that you're really pushed and you're really challenged and you're really excited. And so I love adventures. I think they're one of the most important things for people to take on. And I think if you can look at your life and find where the adventures are and what things you can turn around to say this is an adventure and I'm going to learn from it, then you grow a lot and become better people. So I encourage you, in your life, please go find adventure. Thank you. I'm going to run across Kyrgyzstan in the summer. As you do.
Run.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
So I'm desperate to know, did you have a plan in your head if you did come across a bear on the road?
I had bear spray, and why are you laughing? This is what you do. So the thing about bear spray, when you buy your bear spray from the camping store in Canada, they make you sign something that says you're never going to use this against anything except for a bear. And I'm like, well, if anything attacks me, it's getting the bear spray. But the thing with bear spray, if you read the label, first of all, the animal has to be downwind, and the animal has to be within 5 meters for it to be effective. Now, if a grizzly is within 5 meters of me, I'm not going to be like, oh, a little bit to the left there. That's where the wind is. So it didn't give me a great deal of comfort. In Canada, you always have to just be careful about what you're carrying. So food at night, you always have to store it in a tree or something like that, anything that could attract attention. But I only saw brown and black bears, and they're just cute, right? Anyone else?
How much of local culture do you actually get to absorb when you're traveling?
It definitely depends on the pace, and this is the thing that I've always loved about doing things by bicycle or by foot, because when you go traveling somewhere, you're just going to get stuck with the bus route and going to the highlights. But when you have to cycle through everything, then you end up going to these local places that no one else goes, and you need to go there because you need more water and you need more food. So I cycled through Turkey a few years ago, and that was, I think, by far the best experience, because you could just see vastly the difference between the place in Turkey where the Brits have been versus the other places that you had to go through where they'd never seen a white woman doing a sport before, and they're like, what? And people were really friendly, and they would take you in, and I think that's the best part about traveling in this way, going really slow.
When you were traveling around all the different countries, there's a lot of different languages. Did you find yourself becoming quite isolated because it's really difficult to communicate with locals, or how did you do that aspect of the traveling?
That's a good question, because sometimes you definitely do feel like that, like you're missing out if you can't speak the language. But there are so many common languages, and for some reason, if you're cycling through or walking through or running through someone's country, you just get a lot of respect from people, and they can see what you're doing, they can see that you're struggling and you're struggling on purpose, and people are just overwhelmingly friendly. And I've never been in a situation where I've thought, I have no one to talk to and anything because I don't speak the language. People just come up to you, and even if they can't communicate with you, they find a way. There's smiles, the international language, and all that.
Do you have a sort of adventure kind of mentor, or is there someone that kind of helped you? Or is it...
No, I made this all up. I just thought it was a good idea. No, it's a really funny question, because I think that's what's actually isolating, is that take on these challenges by myself, and I don't have a lot of people in my life that I can directly relate to, like, oh, what would you do in this situation? So I've always done it by myself, and then found these online communities where there are tons of people around the world that do the same stuff. And the nature of this niche is that we're all going to be in different places of the world and not really in the same locale. But No, not a mentor.
It was just similar to that in terms of would you ever consider traveling with a partner or somebody else?
I went skiing with Hilda a couple of weeks ago, and she doesn't hate me yet.
But is it more important that you do it by yourself, or is it
Um,
it just depends on the situation?
I do think I get a lot more out of doing it myself, that self-sufficiency and that getting more of the culture when you're on your own. But no, I'm absolutely not against the